The ASA VPN Connection Profiles. The adaptive security appliance can be a VPN gateway for hundreds or thousands of remote access devices. But one of the challenges is when those connections for VPN services come in, how does that ASA know exactly how to authenticate a given incoming request? The answer to that question is in the magic of the connection profile. In this MicroNugget, we'll take a look at, first of all, what they do, how they operate, and how the ASA decides on which connection profile to use to authenticate an incoming request. Let's jump in. In this MicroNugget, we're going to take a look at what exactly is a connection profile in the world of the ASA with remote access VPNs, and we'll take a look at how it's selected. The first things first, why is it important? Let's take a real world scenario where we have a user on the internet who needs access to his corporate server. How is he going to get it? We're not going to just send a request, plain text like HTTP or something like that over the internet because it's not secure. So to secure it, we're going to use some type of encryption. And three popular options for building remote access VPNs are the clientless SSL VPN, which doesn't require any administrative rights whatsoever on this box. All it takes is a browser that supports SSL. We could have the full AnyConnect tunneled client, which does require software to be installed here, or the traditional IPsec flavor of remote access, either done with a VPN software client or AnyConnect can pull that one off too. So we're going to have a connection coming in. Now the question is, when a connection is coming in, how does the ASA know how to go about authenticating Bob? Because we don't know it's him yet until he puts in his username and password. And the answer is, dun, 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 we're going to use a connection profile. The connection profile is linked or associated with incoming requests for a VPN tunnel, and the ASA looks to that connection profile to learn, okay, I should authenticate this user based on my internal local database, or I should authenticate this user against the AAA server. And if it's one of our full clients, the connection profile could also specify the pools of IP address to use to assign to that user during his trip on our network through the VPN. So that's what the connection profile does for a living. Now the tricky part is, how does the ASA know which connection profile to use? Let's say there's 5 or 6 connection profiles. How does the ASA know which one to use before Bob even puts in his username and password? Well, the answer is simple. The ASA is going to rely on 3 options, one of 3 options: a URL, an alias, or a certificate. Let's explain each one of those. A URL. We tell Bob, hey Bob, when you connect, we're going to pretend this is a global address for a moment. When you connect to https://192.168.1.171/sales. And if we give him that URL, we can actually link that specific URL to a specific connection profile. So then when Bob hits that URL, the ASA says, oh, he's knocking on this door at that specific URL. He's going to be associated with connection profile 1 or connection profile 2. So that's one way. Another option is we could use an alias. What do you mean, Keith, an alias? Well, an alias is something that represents something else. So for example, we could have Bob go to the IP address of https:// to the server itself and give him a drop-down list. And from that drop-down list, we could say, here's connection profile 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then Bob could simply choose the correct quote-unquote group to select his correct connection profile, if he knows it, or if he's been trained to select a specific one. So that's our second option, is a drop-down list that the user chooses. And the third option is to use information from a digital certificate. If Bob had a digital certificate, an identity certificate installed on his computer, when he makes the connection request, the ASA, if trained to do so, could look at that digital certificate and look at the contents of it. And it could say, oh, if the organization equals sales, I will go ahead and use connection profile number 1. So we could link it based on information in Bob's identity certificate that's on his machine or associated with his user. So those are the 3 options. Now what happens if we do find a connection profile? If we use the connection profile, we say, oh great, based on that, I know how to authenticate the user and I know what pools of addresses to give him if he's a full tunnel client. If it didn't find a connection profile, there are some defaults. And the default for web VPN is this default connection profile, and the default for IPsec remote access is this connection profile. And we cannot delete those. However, we can modify the default behavior of those connection profiles. To demonstrate this, let's take a look at a user at this machine right here who's going to connect and be given a list of options from the drop-down list as far as which connection profile to choose. I happen to have a current ASA set up. We've connected to the global address, and we are going to select Sales Connection Alias. That's an alias for the connection profile, and we'll go ahead and log on with the username of Sales User and the correct password. And there we have a web banner that came up for that group. And we'll click on continue, and now we're connected with the clientless VPN portal that can now give us access into the network. If we wanted to go further into the network, we want to go to .5, for example, we could from here type in 10.0.0.5, and that should open up the browser connection through this portal to that device. So in this MicroNugget, we've identified what a connection profile is all about. It's the initial mechanism that the ASA uses to identify how to authenticate a user, which AAA server, local database, etc. to use, and where appropriate, which pool of addresses to use. We've also identified the options of how the ASA can know, even before the user authenticates, what connection profile they're going to use, either by specifying a URL that's linked to a connection profile, an alias that the user gets to choose from a drop-down list, or use an identity certificate and extract information from that to associate the connection with a specific connection profile. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.